Hello, you are listening to the Theatre of Idaho Podcast. My name is Mac Fishman, and I am the president of the Theatre of Idaho, and I'm your host. And I'm joined by my co-host, Gene Andrews.
Hello.
And Gene is the managing artistic director for the Theatre of Idaho. So Gene, I think we should start off by talking about what that job means. What is included in that job description?
Well, the managing artistic director, or the MAD, as I've come to be known, is in charge of all things artistic having to do with the MTI. Also, I have, by kind of inheritance, become responsible for paying all accounts and bills. Just because when our person who did that, our accountant, James, passed away 5 years ago, it fell into my lap to do that if we were going to pay any bills. So I did that. But generally speaking, I run the day-to-day operations of all things artistic. That has to do with choosing shows, rehearsal schedule, although Mac really kind of has his thumb on the rehearsal schedule here for the last couple of years and is doing an excellent job with that. It just takes something off of my plate. But I do have input, and I do review it before it gets posted, so that if I have anything that I need to add to it or take away from it, I can do that. So planning a season, planning and implementing marketing for that season, costume design, set design. I don't actually build the sets, but I do have the authority to say yes or no to a design. I often contribute to the designs of the sets, and the same with costumes. I'm sort of the buck stops here person. I'm the person who plants the final flag and says yes or no to anything we go forward on.
So, for the listeners who may not know, and we're going to be going back in time with our podcast starting with this week, but prior to James, who was your husband, passing away, you were the CEO and he was more of the chief financial officer.
Yes.
And when he passed away, you kind of became both of those things in one. At least for that first year.
Right. And my goal was always to relieve myself of some of both of those activities. And over the last few years we have, when Matt came to work here, he took over a lot of the artistic endeavors and also a lot of the day-to-day management. He first became the company manager, which was managing people, and now he kind of manages all of the tech and still manages company and a lot of the day-to-day operational stuff, which really helps me be able to focus just on the artistic stuff.
Right. So we've been interested in doing a podcast for the Theatre of Idaho for a long time now, but with the coronavirus pandemic, it seems like with all of the isolation, it's the perfect time for us to have time to record some episodes and for you, the audience members, to have time to listen to them. So this is the format that we're going to be doing every week. We'll start off with the introduction and the news. So we'll be talking about any upcoming events with the Theatre of Idaho or around the world that affect us. Like, for example, the only news that we have for this episode is that everybody has been told by the governor in Idaho that we need to stay at home for 21 days unless you have an essential job. Now, I would argue that our job is essential, but not everybody would. But that's the news. But we will be giving you any updates like that we do have in this first part of the podcast every week. There is some news, I guess, for the people who are already on Patreon. You would already know this, but the first 3 shows of the 2021 season have been announced. Not the first 3 in order, but the first 3 that we have announced that we are doing, which is Shrek the Musical for 2 weekends, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and then Little Women is the other one that we have announced so far. And there's 3 more coming that are going to be great shows, but we're not going to do any more announcements on that until the end of the weekend. So, now we're going to go on to the next piece of the podcast, which is going to be the predetermined topic of the week. And this week, we're going to be talking about our history. And we're going to be talking about going all the way back to 1997, the year that the Music Theatre of Idaho came to be. And we're going to have an open conversation about the creation, growth, and adversity of the company and what it faced in those first 3 years. So, Gene, what brought you to Nampa, Idaho in the first place, since you were the person who started this company?
Well, my then husband, Mac's father, got a teaching job at the newly opened Skyview High School. He was the drama teacher, imagine that. And we were living in Kansas at the time, where he was also teaching high school, and I was working as a case manager for adults with developmental disabilities, because theater jobs are hard, impossible to find. Even though I have a doctoral degree in theater, I just was not able to find a job at that point in that place. So we came here. I came here, the mom of 3 little boys who were 3 to 9 years old. And when I got here, and just before we got here too, I did some research and found out that there was really no community theater in the broadest sense in Nampa at the time. There were some small operations that weren't really doing musicals. And so as soon as I moved here, which was in December of 97, I started making a plan for doing a summer musical theater program. And my ex-husband, my husband at the time, was working at Skyview High School, and we had the use of the facilities, and got together with some parents that he had met while he was here in the first semester, who were very interested in starting a community-based program. And we just had a series of meetings, and we hired, having no budget, a music director, and we came up with a 3-show season for that first year, and began to seek community sponsors. And because the community hadn't had anything like that, we were fairly successful at getting some local business people to kind of throw their hat in the ring and sponsor with money, so that we could secure the rights for our first production. And it just went forward from there. We publicized that we were having auditions. We got a fair number of people to come out and audition. I think that first year we probably had 100 people come out to audition, and we thought that was amazing and wonderful. And
what was that ratio for the genders? Was it mostly women?
Yeah, I would say it was probably 9 to 1.
Would you say mostly women and mostly fairly young women?
Women and children. We had announced that we were going to produce Annie, and so there were a lot of children, particularly young girls, that came out to audition, and young women, and a handful of men. And the handful of men that did come out were fairly talented, and so we were able to use them. Our first season, which was the first summer, we did 3 shows, and they were primarily successful, meaning that lots of people attended them. Right. Our ticket prices were ridiculously low, like $8 a ticket or something like that. So you could see the whole season for $24 or something like that.
That's about as much as one adult ticket costs right now
Right.
for one of our shows, which is still on the low end of
Yeah.
of what it is around the
We
valley.
undervalued ourselves, but we were the first. We didn't know how it was going to go. It was a complete unknown. And
So, did you know that this was something you wanted to do for a long time before you started the theater? Is that you wanted to start a community theater, or when the opportunity arose, you just couldn't refuse it?
No, it is something that I thought about for many years. My particular area of study for my doctorate was theater management. I finished about half of an MBA as tools courses while I was finishing my doctorate, and so I had courses in marketing and management and business administration and stuff like that.
A little bit of knowledge in a lot of areas that you've tapped into and self-taught through the years.
Right. Right, but I started my study in directing. I never actually enjoyed acting. I didn't like to be on the stage, but I found that I could be fairly successful. I had good vision for directing, for bringing shows to life, and so I took those two areas, those two strengths, and combined them. I even have, quite a background in tech theater and design and building and stuff like that. So, I had the basis for everything that we needed, and really wanted to share that and get other people to take on some of these areas. And in some years it worked, and in some years it was just me.
So that's how it started in 1997, and then in 1998, 1999, you went through some personal changes. So you actually started working at Skyview.
I worked 1 year at Skyview, yes. I don't have a teaching credential, so I was on a special contract. And we continued our summer program. And then as we got into 1999, going towards 2000, it became clear that if we were going to, we couldn't just exist on a summer program. We had to develop a year-round program, and we needed to be in a different venue because there are handicaps associated with being either, in a venue of any kind that is outside a regular theater venue, such as a high school or a church or anything like that. So we were able to, do you know what year Into the Woods was?
Into the Woods was 1999.
Okay, so that was the first production that we performed at the Nampa Civic Center. Mm-hmm. And it was under a special arrangement with the director there, and it was really scary because it was a larger house than we had ever filled, and we did not have a marketing budget that we thought could fill it, and it was because of the vision of Bill Steffen, who was the director then, that we were given the opportunity to move our season to the Civic Center, and he was awesome and the city was awesome with helping us and making that a possibility. And slowly, we built up our season ticket subscribers till at one point we had like 1,200 season ticket subscribers. Now,
that was before the recession.
Yes, that was before the recession.
Which we will talk about in another episode for sure. So I do have some questions about during that time period. So we didn't just perform at the Skyview High School and the Civic Center in those years. We also performed at the Sandstone Center.
Sandstone Event Center, yep. We had several productions.
We had the first production of Forever Plaid there,
mm-hmm.
and the first production of the Taffetas. And interestingly enough, many years later, we had the second show of the Taffetas also at...
Yeah. Along with One Enchanted Evening.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, and we performed at several places throughout the year that was not Civic Center, but Civic Center is where our home is still today in 2020, provided we are ever allowed to perform again as the human race gets back together post-coronavirus pandemic. So, other questions about this time period are, where were we keeping set pieces when we were building them at this point?
Well,
in that time.
My house, friends' houses,
garages,
barns,
carports.
We built sets on people's driveways. We were allowed to use, when Edmark moved off of the boulevard, before they tore that building down to rebuild on that site.
Where Dutch Brothers in Nampa is now.
Right, in that little strip mall there, where Tango's used to be.
Yes, Tango's and Empanadas.
We were allowed to use the building to rehearse and to build sets, and that was gold for us, because we were preparing for a production of Cinderella, which had a huge set, and we were able to use the garage out there to build that, and we were able to rehearse in the showroom. And
I remember that. That was one of my earliest memories of being involved. When I was a kid, I used to participate in many of the shows, and I remember we were in that building for almost a year, it seemed like, because we did Sound of Music while we were there too, at the beginning of Oliver, and we'd have all this space, all these different rooms to be in, and it was awesome. We were able to have this nice big set for Cinderella, and that was probably getting a little bit past 2000. That's getting into like 2001. But from between 2000 to 2001 is when that time frame was. And interestingly enough, now we are doing Cinderella again. And we are facing an issue of not being able to get together to rehearse and build sets. And we're going to be doing a lot of that digitally, the set building, that is. Obviously, the rehearsing will be done digitally. And now we're looking more into using nice big pieces of scenery in addition to projection, due to the amount of time that we will have to actually build sets and prepare for the show, with also the better ability to use projection and rear projection and project from the booth. In Wizard of Oz, it was very successful. Again, that's, I guess, more news about what's going on with us. So I think we've covered quite a bit of information from that time period. I think that there's a lot of people who don't really know what that was like. There are several company members who are still around from that year, one of them being myself, you, Glynis Calhoun is around, Amanda Watson, Naomi Schumacher, who was Naomi Rainson, Sandy Shepard, who is still around. There are several of us who are still in shows, who've taken large breaks over the years, but most of our company members who've been around for a long time joined between 2000 and 2005. And those are the ones that have really stuck around for a really long time. I'm thinking like the Ellis family, Eric Pugh's family. And we collected quite a few in that next time frame that we'll be talking about. Next week we'll probably talk about 2001 to 2005. So the next part of our podcast is going to be a section that we call Gene's TED Talk. And the reason that it's called this is during notes for rehearsal, she will often get off on a tangent and then end it by saying, "Thank you for listening to my TED Talk." Or if you say something to her that is a long story and she wants you to get to the point, she says, "Okay, thank you for your TED Talk." But she today, what are you going to talk about, Gene?
I probably should explain that term, I did not invent that.
No.
That came from my 16-year-old daughter, who says that quite often when she goes off on a tangent and I'll say, "Okay, get to the point," and she'll say, "And that's my TED Talk." So anyway, today we decided that my TED Talk was going to be on the best and the worst things about leading a community theater, or the Music Theatre of Idaho, since that's what I know.
Right.
So when you're the leader, you're responsible for a lot of things. And one of the things you're responsible for is running a rehearsal, or running a rehearsal schedule. And things are not done willy-nilly. They are done in a progressive order, which has been planned out from the beginning. I mean, if you're doing it correctly.
Which we always
do. Always correctly.
Yes.
So, anyway, time is planned and focused very succinctly. And you plan for certain people to be at rehearsal. Sometimes it's not everybody in a cast. Sometimes it's only a few people. Sometimes you start with a few people and build to a group. Sometimes you start with a group. And anyway, we try to make sure we use people's time wisely. So we let them know who is needed when. And the worst thing about being, well, except, the coronavirus is the worst thing right now. But the interpersonal thing that's the worst thing about running a community theater is when people don't show up for rehearsal and they don't communicate.
Right.
Because I like these people, generally speaking, and if someone doesn't show up for where they're intended to be, I have them dead on a highway somewhere. Whereas if they would have just called and let me know, I'm behind traffic, or so-and-so got sick and I can't make it tonight. We could have rescheduled and everything would have been fine. But when I spend half the rehearsal worrying about where these people are, it really takes away from what I can give to the other people. So that's the worst thing. The best thing, I think, is family. The fact that the Music Theatre of Idaho is family for a lot of people in the company, because they get to know each other so well. We do require that they be in more than one show a year, so they see each other in different aspects. We try to provide social outlets, of course not now, but so that people can get to know each other better. And Mac has been involved in production since he was 3. I think the summer he turned 4 was the first summer that we were here. So, how old are you?
I am 26.
Yeah, so that would be right. Yep. Because you'll be 27 this summer, right?
Right.
So, yeah, and that's a long time. I mean, that's, way more than most of his life. And all of my children have been involved in the theater. I was divorced and remarried in 1999, and James came from the UK, so his knowledge of American theater was very limited, but he made the decision early on in our marriage that the best thing for the marriage was for him to be involved. And so
in the theater, not
in
your
the
marriage.
theater, yeah. Well, that too. But we took his skill set, his strengths, and employed them, and it was better for the theater. I mean, he made a huge difference in the commercial viability of the theater, and also later on, he decided that he would like to be on stage. And even though he wasn't the most brilliant actor or musician, yeah, he made do, and he had fun, and he loved it, and he loved being there with his family. James and I adopted two little girls who eventually became theater lovers and participants and dancers, and
right. I met my wife here.
Yes, and yep.
And there are several people in the company who have met their spouses through the theater. Okay, so let's wrap this section up by Jean saying,
"Thanks for listening to my TED Talk."
The final part of our podcast format will have audience participation with a question. And so this is only for Patreon subscribers right now. In the comments section, I would like you guys to tell me which show in the 2020 season that you are most looking forward to. The remaining choices being Pirates of Penzance, Cinderella, Chess, Mamma Mia, Into the Woods, and Elf. Another question for you Patreon supporters are, what are some other topics that you would like to hear in the section of Gene's TED Talk? Alright, thank you guys so much. We'll be back again next week for the next episode of the Music Theatre of Idaho.